The reports page in the gateway is where you can find a complete history of all transactions run on your gateway account. This page is broken into two sections, the transaction snapshot and search transactions. We'll come back to the transaction snapshot, as search transactions is where most people will spend a lot of their time. The search transactions form will return a list of transactions based on the criteria provided. As you can see, there are quite a few fields available, and you can fill out as many or as few of these as you would like. The only fields that you must fill out are the start date and end date. By default, we show you the current month, starting from the 1st all the way to present day. For many merchants, that may be all they need to search for their transactions, so I can just hit submit. This generates a report with all the transactions run in the current month. As you can see, I have a number of sales, voids, authorizations, captures, refunds, along with a summary of each transaction. I can see what type it was, the current status of the transaction ID, the customer name, if any was provided. Details is the card or check information for the transaction. Time is when the actions took place, and the amount, of course, is the amount that was charged. To look at one of these transactions in particular, I can click into the transaction ID, and that brings me to the transaction detail page. On this page, you will see all information that we have saved for a transaction. You can see general information on when the transaction was completed, some particulars about the card or check account used, the authorization code, address and CVV statuses, as well as some additional pieces of information. The billing and shipping information is based on what information was entered when the transaction was posted. We have an order information section for those who collect customer ID, or order description. And we have transaction history down at the bottom. Transaction history will show the actions taken on a transaction. So in this case, we can see a card sale was done, the status is a success, we show the timestamp, and the amount. Additionally, at the bottom, we show where the transaction was initiated from. In this case, it was the virtual terminal. We also show you the username who initiated it, as well as the IP address that they did it from. Back at the top, we have some actions you can take on this transaction. So in this case, we can void, we can refund it. We have charge again, and you can do a charge again auth or a charge again sale. These allow you to initiate a new transaction based on the card and billing information provided for this customer. Let's click sale. And as you can see, it autofills the form for a sale, everything but the amount, with all of the transaction information that was provided in the first one. The name and address information has already been filled out for us, so all we need to do is fill out the amount. You are able to print a receipt, which brings up a new screen where you can have a nicely formatted version of the page and hit print to print the receipt. You can also hit email receipt, in which case will prompt you to enter an email address to send an email receipt to. The final actions on this page are to create a subscription or to add to Vault. You can click either of these to create a subscription or a Vault ID based on the card information provided in this transaction. One additional useful feature on this page is the little magnifying glass icon that shows up next to the credit card number or bank account number for any transaction. This won't show you the value for that account number, but if you click it, it does give you a complete history for the entire gateway of all transactions run on that account. This is really convenient for when you're trying to find all the transactions run on a particular customer. This report will show all transactions from the beginning of your gateway account, no matter what the date range was you were originally searching on. Many transactions will have multiple actions listed in the transaction history section of the transaction detail report. In this example, we have a card sale for $10, and the second action is a card void. So this was a sale and then it was voided. We can see the void was 8 minutes later, and it was done through the virtual terminal as well by the same user at the same IP address. Different types of transactions will have different numbers of actions, but usually you will see between 1 and 3 actions under the transaction history. If you have a large number of transactions and need to filter by a certain criteria, we give you the power to do that with many options. The status field at the top of the page allows you to filter this list by just the transaction statuses. For example, pending settlement, complete, or canceled. The next section is transaction type, where you can choose between credit card or check transactions. Action type is where you can tell us if you want to see results for sales, refunds, captures. The processor dropdown will appear if you have multiple credit card or check processors on your account, so you can see just those transactions run on a particular processor. You can also filter by mobile device. No mobile device is checked, so that'll show all transactions from any source. The next fields are all relatively self-explanatory. If you have a particular transaction ID, you can search for that. Same with an order ID, a platform ID, or a customer ID. Last name is going to be the customer's billing last name. Company, if company was entered. Email address is going to be the customer's billing email. Account number is where you can enter the credit card or checking account number that was used for a transaction. You can search for either the last 4 digits of the account or the full number. You can see this account has a field called Beans. This is for a merchant-defined field that I have created for this account. All merchant-defined fields will show up on this list that you have created, and you can search based on their values. Amount range is where you can tell us the dollar amount that you want to search for. For example, I could search for transactions between $50 and $100. Finally, as we've seen, you can look up the date range. Please be aware that all of these rules will depend on the date range that you provide. For example, if you search for a transaction ID that is valid but happened in November, this search will not work because you are only looking at December transactions. You would want to select this dropdown, go back to November, and run the search. Additionally, to make transaction searching a little easier by date, we have a little dropdown over here where you can select based on commonly used criteria. For example, if I want to see just the last 90 days, I can select that, and it autofills the form and shows me the results. That brings us to the transaction snapshot. This is unique from the search transactions functionality that we just looked at in that it doesn't return a list of transactions, but a higher level overview of what transactions are running through your account. As you can see, there are far fewer criteria for you to enter. You essentially just give us a date range and what you want to group your transactions by. Settlement batch is selected by default, but you can hit this dropdown and choose from whichever criteria you want. For example, if I want to look at how many Visas, MasterCards, and Discovers are running through my account, I can group by card/payment type. Give us the date range, and hit submit. That generates a report that shows the card types as well as checks that have run through the account on the date range you've provided. You can see the total number of transactions run on each card type and the total amount that was run through, as well as totals at the bottom. If I want to drill into one of these, I can click the magnifying glass next to one of them, and that gives me the option to either view these transactions, which brings up a list, where I can then click into any one that I'd like, or I can filter down further. I can then filter down by user account that processed the transactions, or transaction source. So if I want to look at transaction source, now we're looking at card payment type Visa and filtered by transaction source. So these are just the Visa transactions run through all these methods in the gateway. I see nothing for most of these, but there's a magnifying glass next to virtual terminal as well as iProcess. For your knowledge, settlement batch is the first option and will look something like this. This shows you your settlement batches that were sent to your credit card processor, along with times, dates, and total amounts as well. You can drill into these, of course, and filter down even further, or just view these transactions. Additionally on this list is card/payment type. Payment processor is to filter by credit card or check processors that you have boarded on your account. User account is to filter by what users are running transactions. If you have multiple users on the account, this is helpful to see what each user is processing. Selecting transaction source will give you a list of all the methods you can use to process transactions through your gateway account, all the way from API system to QuickBooks to Swipe to the virtual terminal and iProcess. You can additionally break it down by day, week, or month, as well as any merchant-defined fields that you have provided. From any list of transactions that you have pulled up, you can see this download option at the bottom. You can choose between a Microsoft Excel file or a CSV, a comma-separated value, and a format. The original format is the default, however you can create custom ones in your settings. I'm going to download the original format and hit download. And opening the file will reveal all information on the transactions requested. This is particularly useful for merchants who need even more control over their transaction history or to import it into another system.